Lena made me feel embarrassed after expecting me to pay her and her friends' bills. So I, 25, went out to dinner for my sister-in-law's 28th bachelorette party this weekend. But before I get into what happened, I need to give you a little backstory so you know how we got here. My husband is 26. Nate and his sister Sel have always had a complicated sibling dynamic, owing primarily to how their parents treated them growing up between myself and Nate. It was always painfully obvious who the golden child was in their family. My in-laws have coddled me for as long as anyone can remember. If she even hinted that she desired something, she got it. No questions were asked, no compromises. She was the type of girl who had never heard the word no. If she wanted the most recent iPhone, she got it. Even if it meant that my in-laws had to postpone purchasing something for themselves in order for her to attend a school trip, it didn't matter how expensive it was. Meanwhile, Nate had to fend for himself. Growing up, Nate was more of a nerd. He was the kid who loved video games, read science fiction novels, and spent hours tinkering with his computer. He wasn't unpopular, but he wasn't as outgoing as his sister. Nate was frequently picked on at school because he wasn't into sports and didn't care about trying to fit in with the cool kids, and my in-laws. They never made things easier for him. They would simply tell him things like, "Why can't you be more like your sister? Perhaps if you were more outgoing, people would like you more." It was as if they were completely unaware of how damaging the comparisons were. They saw Sil as the ideal example of how a child should be popular. Pretty is always in the spotlight. And Nate was just Nate. He was expected to transform into someone he was not, someone more socially acceptable, similar to his sister. But here's the thing. Nate took all of this and used it as motivation to improve himself in his own way. He concentrated on his studies, and when he wasn't studying, he delved into coding, learning everything he could about computers. He persevered through all of the teasing and comments from his own family, eventually landing at a prestigious university where we met. We both pursued technology degrees and now work in the industry. We have excellent, well-paying jobs. And I don't mean to brag, but we're doing very well for ourselves. We worked hard for everything we have, and we live a very comfortable life that we created from the ground up. Now, let us talk about my sister-in-law, Sil. She still lives at home with my in-laws, who pretty much cover all of her expenses. When I say everything, I mean rent, groceries, and even her car payments. As if she never actually left the nest. And, to be honest, she does not appear to be in a hurry right now. I don't want to sound harsh, but he has a history of making, shall we say, questionable life decisions. She has a daughter, my adorable 4-year-old niece and her ex-boyfriend, whose relationship ended rather badly. According to what I've heard, they were on and off for a while, and when it finally ended, she moved back in with my in-laws, who were more than willing to support her. That is not all, however. Sil is now preparing for her second marriage, and the wedding has been a hot topic in the family. When she announced she was getting married again, I could see the excitement on my in-laws' faces. They acted as if it was the greatest news ever, immediately getting into planning mode, discussing venues, dresses, guest lists, and the whole shebang. It felt like they were attempting to recreate the magical first wedding vibe, which never actually occurred because she and her ex did not have a traditional wedding. This time, she's determined to go all out, and it's clear that my in-laws are willing to cover the entire cost just to ensure she has her dream date. I quote, "We've been trying to maintain a cordial relationship with her, despite the fact that we've always had some tension. To be fair, we've mostly kept it civil, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some resentment simmering beneath the surface. It's difficult not to notice the stark contrast between how her life is managed and how Nate's was. Nate and I are totally self-sufficient. We worked hard, established our careers, and paid all of our own bills. We have a lovely apartment. We're saving for a house and making plans for the future, all with no handouts. I believe that this disparity rubs some people the wrong way, even if she doesn't express it directly. You can tell by the way she speaks about money, success, and what's fair. The bachelorette party. I receive an invitation to a small, intimate dinner with her closest friends and family at a fancy, upscale restaurant in the city. This isn't your average dinner spot. It's the type of place you go for a special occasion, where the waiters wear suits and the wine list includes bottles that cost more than my monthly car payment. I figured it would be a fun night out, and I wanted to make an effort to show how happy I was for her. We might not be best friends, but she is Nate's sister, which means something. So I got myself ready and chose a cute outfit. Something chic, but not over the top. Since it was her night, I purchased a small, thoughtful gift for her. I chose a pretty bracelet that I thought would complement her engagement ring. I knew she liked jewelry, so I assumed it was a safe bet when I arrived at the restaurant. The atmosphere was exactly as I expected. Dimly lit, elegant decor with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, and soft classical music playing in the background. It was one of those places that exuded luxury, and you could tell that every detail had been meticulously planned to provide you with an exceptional dining experience. The table was set with white linens, polished silverware, and tall candles. It all looked lovely, and for a brief moment I considered whether this could be a pleasant evening. I was one of the last to arrive, and when I did, everyone was already sipping champagne and laughing. Still was in the middle of telling a story, gesticulating animatedly, and she lit up when she saw me enter. I could tell she was in her element, surrounded by her friends and basking in the attention. I handed her the gift, and she thanked me, hugging me briefly before placing it on the table beside her. We made the usual small talk, and I took my seat. The evening started off well. We ordered a round of cocktails, and there were plenty of appetizers to go around: dot crab cakes, bruschetta, truffle fries, you name it. The conversation was flowing, and everyone seemed to be in good spirits. I must admit that I was beginning to relax, despite the fact that I am not particularly close to the majority of the women there. The atmosphere was light, and I was enjoying myself. Salespeople were talking about wedding plans, gossiping about old acquaintances, and generally keeping the mood upbeat. I was beginning to think, hey, this might not be so awkward after all. We ordered our entrees, and everything looked incredible. The menu featured lobster risotto, filet mignon, and duck confit. Syl had clearly gone to great lengths to make this a memorable night, which I appreciated. It's not every day that you have the opportunity to dine at such a nice restaurant, so I was happy to indulge a little. Then dessert appeared. Plates of lovely little pastries, chocolate lava cakes, and fruit tarts were brought to the table, and they looked almost too good to eat. We were all stuffed by this point, but we still had room for dessert. There was laughter and toasts to the bride-to-be, and for a brief moment, I wondered if this was a turning point. Perhaps we can actually be friendly. It was one of those rare occasions when everything seemed perfect, and I was glad I had arrived. But then, just as I was getting into the warm, contented glow of a good meal, the waiter approached. He was holding a sleek black leather folder, the type that all upscale restaurants use to present the bill. Naturally, I assumed he was going to hand it over to Sale, as she had organized the entire evening. She was the one who invited us all, after all. But nope. He walks right past her and puts it directly in front of me. I remember just staring at the bill. I'm completely taken off guard. For a moment, I wondered if it was a mistake, like the waiter mixed up the tables or something. I was sitting there with my mind racing, trying to figure out what was going on, when I heard Syl clear her throat. She leaned forward with a casual, almost smug expression, saying, "Oh, I forgot to mention. My parents and I were talking, and we were thinking that you and my brother could cover the bill for this as a wedding gift, since you are not contributing financially to my wedding." I could feel my jaw dropping. I was completely taken off guard in that moment. I couldn't believe the audacity of her suggestion. We were at this incredibly expensive restaurant, and she casually decided that Nate and I would cover the entire bill for 8 people without even asking us first. It was not even a question. It was simply stated as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I wasn't sure what to say. I sat there stunned, staring at the check folder in front of me, unsure if this was a joke, but no one laughed. I couldn't believe what I heard. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity of what she'd just said. And, to be honest, I assumed this was a joke. Maybe she was trying to be funny. Perhaps this was one of those weird, awkward attempts at humor that just didn't work. But nope, there she was, sitting there with that self-satisfied, expected expression on her face, as if she had just solved a problem that no one else saw. She was completely serious. I managed to stutter out. And you didn't think to bring it up earlier? Because, it's a big deal to expect someone to cover a nearly $1,000 bill with no warning. I could feel my cheeks getting hot, but not in an embarrassed or flustered way. More of a slow burn of rage. Who does this? Who plans an entire dinner at a high-end restaurant and then decides, on a whim, that someone else will pay the bill as a gift? I couldn't wrap my mind around it. That's when she becomes defensive, almost as if she's surprised I had the nerve to question her. She crossed her arms, tilted her head slightly, and commented, "You guys are doing so well financially." So, what is the big deal? I am confident that my brother would not object. She said it casually, as if she were discussing something minor like splitting an appetizer rather than spending $1,000 on a dinner for 8 people. Her tone was almost condescending, as if she was doing me a favor by allowing us to pay the bill, and my blood began to boil. It was not about the money, sure. A $1,000 bill is not something you can simply cover without blinking, but Nate and I are in a position to afford it. That was not the issue here. It was the entitlement, the sheer audacity to do this to me out of nowhere, to assume that I would simply nod and agree to pay because we are well off. It was the way she spoke, as if this was just a formality, and I was supposed to be honored to have this thrust upon me at the last minute. So I asked, "Why doesn't your fiancé fit the bill? Or, I'm not sure, maybe your parents, as they were the ones who brought up this idea with you." I tried to maintain an even tone in my voice, but I could hear the sharpness creeping in. I was angry, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Her eyes widened, and she looked at me as if I had just said something completely inappropriate, as if I had insulted her on a deeply personal level. It was almost comical how shocked she appeared, as if the thought of someone pushing back had never crossed her mind. She starts going off, her voice rising slightly, saying things like, "You're the wealthiest people in both my family and my fiancé's family, and we didn't expect you to act like this." She said it in a way that made it sound like I was being ridiculous for not simply agreeing, as if my refusal was some sort of personal attack on her. She seemed genuinely surprised that I wasn't on board, and the way she phrased it indicated that she expected things to go differently. In her mind, I should have been nodding along, pulling out my credit card, and telling the waiter to simply charge it all to me with a smile. But that was not happening. I could feel the frustration rising inside of me, and I knew I wasn't going to sit there and let her walk all over me. I said, "Wait a minute. You think that because Nate and I make decent money, it is our responsibility to pay for this entire dinner without being asked?" I tried to maintain a steady voice, but I could hear the incredulity in it. I was still trying to give her time to realize how absurd it all sounded. To perhaps take a step back and admit that, while it was a ridiculous expectation of someone, she did not meet it. Instead, she doubled down. "It is not about responsibility. It's about what's fair," she explained, as if she were explaining something simple to a child. "We all know that you and Nate are the wealthiest. You've got good jobs, you're living comfortably, and we aren't asking you to pay for the wedding. This was just meant to be a nice gesture or contribution. I didn't expect it to be such a big deal." That's when I realized she truly believed she was right in her mind. This was not a large, presumptuous request. It was a small, reasonable request, and I was overreacting by not immediately agreeing. I could feel everyone at the table staring. And there was an awkward silence after her little speech, as if no one knew how to react. Some of her friends were staring down at their drinks, avoiding eye contact, while others were watching me, clearly waiting to see how I would react. I took a deep breath, trying not to snap, and asked if this was what you wanted. "You should have discussed it with Nate and me before springing it on me at the end of the meal. It isn't okay. We came here to celebrate with you, not to be surprised with the bill. If your parents recommended it, perhaps they should have been the ones to speak with us about it." I could feel my hands trembling slightly as I said it, not sure if from anger or nerves, but I didn't mind. I was done playing nice. She just stared at me, her expression gradually changing from confusion to annoyance, and then she said something that made my blood turn cold. "Maybe if you and Nate weren't so stingy, you'd contribute something to my wedding rather than just showing up." She said it with a slight smirk, as if she was trying to provoke me. She seemed to want me to lash out so that she could play the victim. I could see some of her friends exchange nervous glances, clearly concerned about where this was going, but no one said anything. I couldn't believe this woman had so much nerve. Here I was, trying to be civil and make a point without causing a scene, and she had the audacity to call me stingy, as if we hadn't spent hundreds of dollars on gifts, travel, and countless other expenses just to attend this wedding in the first place. The entitlement was staggering. I could feel my heart racing, and I had to clench my jaw to avoid saying something I'd regret. So, who does she think she's implying? That we are somehow obligated to fund her lifestyle and wedding festivities simply because we have been successful? It was infuriating. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to remain calm. I took another breath, tried to keep my voice steady, and said, "You're correct. We're doing well, but that doesn't mean we have to pay for everything simply because someone says we should. That is not how this works, and it is definitely not how you ask for a favor." I could see her bristle at that, and for a brief moment I thought she was going to argue, but she did not. Instead, she sat there, arms crossed, staring at me as if I had just ruined her night. I replied, "Sorry, but I am not. Your parents. Don't expect handouts from me." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care at that point. I had been polite. I attempted to make my point without causing a scene. And yet here she was, acting as if it was my duty to pay hundreds of dollars without hesitation. She looked at me with a smirk and crossed arms, as if she thought she had the upper hand. She seemed to expect me to fold and give, because that is what everyone else does around her. But I was not playing that game. That's when she totally lost it. I could see her face flush with rage, and she fired back, her voice rising. "Are you serious? You are going to ruin my night with this. I assumed you were supposed to be family, and you can't do anything nice without making a big deal about it. God, you're so selfish." She was practically spitting out the words, and I could feel the tension at the table rise as everyone fell silent, probably hoping that if they pretended hard enough, the whole situation would simply disappear. But I was not going to let her steamroll me. I simply stood up, pushed back my chair, and grabbed my purse. I wasn't going to stand there and let her berate me for not catering to her every whim. "Have fun paying your bill," I said, trying to maintain my composure despite my internal rage. I took out my card and handed it to the waiter, instructing him to charge my half of the bill. I didn't bother waiting for an answer from CL. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I didn't care. I paid for my share, tucked my card back into my wallet, and walked out of the restaurant without saying anything, leaving behind the stunned silence of the table and, frankly, an explosive mess that I knew would have consequences. My walk to the car was a blur. My heart was still racing, and I could feel my hands trembling. I kept replaying what had just happened in my head, trying to make sense of it and calm myself down. A part of me was angry. I was so angry because I couldn't believe she had the nerve to do that, but another part of me was simply tired. I'm tired of entitlement. I'm tired of being expected to cover everything because we're financially stable. It wasn't fair, and I was over pretending it was. When I got home, Nate could tell something was wrong. He asked how the dinner went, and I could barely contain my frustration and disbelief as I recounted the entire experience. From the moment the waiter handed me the bill, there was a smug assumption that we would simply take care of it. She reacted angrily when I told her no. I could see his expression change as I told the story, from curious to shocked to furious. I could tell he was trying to remain calm for my sake, but I could see the tension in his jaw and the way he clenched his fists slightly while listening. When I finished, there was a brief and heavy silence. Nate took a deep breath and said, "I can't believe she did that. I knew she could be entitled, but this is a whole other level." He shook his head, clearly struggling to process everything. "You're right to say no. I do not care what you or anyone else says. We more than just a bank account that she can access whenever she wants. This is ridiculous." Hearing him say that was a huge relief, because I was worried he'd try to smooth things over and suggest I should have just gone along with it to keep the peace. But no, he was just as outraged as I was, and knowing he had my back made me feel a little less alone in this situation. We spent the rest of the night discussing how we wanted to handle things. Nate was adamant that I had done the right thing, and he was already considering whether we should attend the wedding at all. If this is how she is going to treat you and try to take advantage of us, Why should we support it?" he said, and I honestly agreed. We've always known that his family prefers to sell, but this was a whole new level of entitlement, and I didn't want to set a precedent in which she believes she can just demand whatever she wants from us. But of course, the consequences were swift and severe. My mill called me the very next day, and the moment I heard her voice, I knew it would not be pleasant. She was furious, practically yelling into the phone about how I had embarrassed Sil in front of her friends, how I had ruined her special night, and how could I be so heartless as not to contribute to the wedding in such a simple way? She just wanted to have a nice evening and you turned it into a disaster, as if I were a villain. Apparently, Sil went crying to her as soon as she got home, spinning the story to make herself look like the victim. And now Mill was rallying behind her, as if I had committed some heinous crime. I tried to explain my side, but Mill clearly did not want to hear it. She just kept going on, listing all the ways I had harmed her precious daughter, and I could feel my patience fraying. Finally, I cut her off and said, "Look, I apologize if she felt embarrassed, but it is not my fault." She had no right to force that on me at the last minute. If she wanted us to pay the bill, she should have asked us first, not ambushed me in front of everyone. We do not have to pay for everything just because we are doing well, and I'm tired of being treated like a walking checkbook. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line, and then Mill spoke in a condescending tone. "Perhaps if you were a better team player, we wouldn't be having these issues. You must apologize to Sel and make things right." I could almost see her shaking her head in disappointment, as if I were a child who needed to be disciplined into compliance. But I was finished. I told her over my dead body, "I am not sorry for standing up for myself, and if you think I'll just give in and keep the peace, you're in for a surprise." So I hung up. I knew that would not be the end of it, and sure enough, over the next few days, I began receiving messages and phone calls from other members of Nate's family, including cousins, aunts, and even a few uncles. It was as if they were all taking sides, and I had somehow become the antagonist in this ridiculous drama. Some of them were supportive, saying they couldn't believe someone would do something like that. Others, however, clearly agreed with her, accusing me of being out of line for my comments and suggesting that I simply apologize to keep the peace. I could not believe it. How did I end up being portrayed as the villain in this situation? I even talked to my own mother about it, hoping for some reassurance, but she surprised me by suggesting that perhaps I had gone too far. "I understand why you were upset, but referring to her as an entitled brat, perhaps that was not the best way to handle it. Sometimes it's best to simply apologize and move on." "You know," she said softly, as if she was trying to calm me down. I could tell she was trying to avoid conflict, but I couldn't help feeling frustrated. Why should I be the one to apologize when I was not in the wrong? So here I am, caught in the middle of this family drama, with Nate pressuring me to apologize, my own mother urging me to make peace, and me feeling more adamant than ever that I did the right thing by advocating for myself. Every time I think of it, I become angry all over again, and I can't help but wonder, am I really in the wrong here?